Hi, this is Lynne Jones. I am here at my gift shop, Lynne's Cards and Gifts. As a board member of the Hampton Theater Company, I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've been reading during the pandemic. And I'll start by maybe grabbing the first one, The Dutch House, which happens to be right here, by Ann Patchett. She's a wonderful writer whose book Bel Canto is on the top 10 of a lot of people's reading list. The Dutch House was great, not up there with Bel Canto, I don't think, but really good psychologically about a brother and a sister whose lives are completely defined by the house that they lost, and they can't get past it. So it's a good read. The other book I just finished reading is this one, Sue Monk Kidd's new book, The Book of Longings. You might remember she wrote The Secret Life of Bees, which is another book that's on a lot of people's top 10. And she also wrote The Invention of Wings and The Mermaid's Chair, which were good. This was a really lovely book about her conception of the woman who would have been Jesus's wife. And she's a strong, independent young woman who happens to be a scribe back in the first century, which is unusual. And it's her story as it intersects with Jesus. And it has a lot of wonderful details about their life and that back in the day, and things I never knew. Very good read. I loved it. That reminded me of another book that I read called The Weight of Ink, which was, it was actually a National Jewish Book Award winner. This was about another young woman who was a scribe at a time when she wasn't supposed to be, back in the 1600s, and she was sort of a hidden voice, and she pretended to be a man through her writing, and that was a fascinating book. It was kind of a mystery, and very well done. Two other books that I will put together were both some of my favorite books of the year that were about the FDR's WPA program, where he funded the pack horse librarians that went into Appalachia. And two of these wonderful books, one was called The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. I don't have them here. And The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek. And they were both about these pack horse librarians, and they were both incredible reads. The second one, The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek, oh, I didn't say who it was by, but anyway, that book also involved a lot of prejudice, because the woman was had a rare genetic disorder, and she was blue. And this is a real thing that they actually had in the hills in Kentucky, these people with a genetic disorder. And it was interesting how they were treated by their neighbors and friends. There was a couple times this year when I had trouble getting into books because of what was going on in the world. So I resorted to going back to a couple of my old favorites. And one of them was called Goodnight, Mr. Tom. This was a book that I discovered in a bookstore in Alexandria, Virginia, in this huge bookstore, when it had a note on it that said it was the owner's favorite book. And I said, well, I'm buying it because she has all these books. It's a huge bookstore, and it was her favorite book. And it's one of those books that stays with you forever, and I think every person should be required to read it. It's about World War II, London, when they sent the children out during the Blitz to the countryside. And this little boy ended up in the house of a curmudgeon, an old widower who didn't like anybody, and ultimately the two basically saved each other. So it's a wonderful story, very uplifting, and very satisfying read. And I was able to concentrate on it because it was just so moving. And that brought me into some of the other World War II books, which I love reading about World War II. There was two of them, one called City of Women by David Gillam, which was the dark side of Berlin during World War II, when all the men were gone and the city was run, basically all the women were left. And you really came away with a sense of the fear, this distrust, and the difficulty people had deciding whether to ignore what was going on or do something about it. The other book about that time period called City of Girls was by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And that was a wonderful, fun book, especially for theater goers, because it was New York City, and it was an old theater that just kept going and going and going and had to entertain people through the war and after the war. And it was the story of this struggling theater and the people within it. A delightful book. Another book about World War II that I read was The Flight Girls, which was a book about the WASPs, the Women Air Force Service pilots that stepped up and started teaching pilots and testing planes and delivering planes across the country. And it starts on the day Pearl Harbor was bombed, and it goes on from there. And it's about the wonderful relationships between the women that were flying together. They had no other commonality but flying, and it was a big one. There was so many good books. Another book that I read, that I went back to, which was a familiar one of my all-time favorites. It's called The Power of One by Bryce Courtenay, and unforgettable characters that will stay with you forever. Mostly about a 5-year-old boy who gets sent to boarding school. He's an English boy in South Africa, and he gets mercilessly bullied by the Boer kids, and he decides he wants to become a boxing champion. And he spends the rest of his life trying to become a boxing champion. And he has he finds incredible strength within by taking pieces of the people that he meets along the way, strengths that they've taught him, and life lessons that he learns along the way. And he starts out this little boy alone. He's practically an orphan, and his only friend is a chicken named Grandpa Chuck. And he ends up with a whole series of unforgettable friends that teach him all about life. And we get to see the brutalities of South Africa through the eyes of a child, which is a really fresh angle, and it will stay with you forever. And I have lots of other books, but I think I'll stop there. It's long enough. Okay, I skipped a couple.